The leather of Elias's saddle groaned beneath him, a sound he'd heard so many times over 42 years that he barely noticed it anymore. But on this Sunday afternoon, something felt different. That creak carried a warning he couldn't quite name. He squinted against the June sun, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. The temperature had hit 97 degrees by noon, and now, at 3 o'clock, the heat still shimmered off the prairie in waves. His horse, a 14-year-old bay named Chester, flicked his ears back and forth, catching something Elias hadn't heard yet. Then he saw it. Dust. A plume rising from the dirt road that ran past the Lazy S Ranch, maybe a mile out. That dust moved too fast for a Sunday afternoon. Sundays were for church, then potluck, then slow drives into town for ice cream. Sundays were not for speeding trucks on back roads. Elias shifted in his saddle and felt the crinkle of paper in his vest pocket. He didn't need to pull it out. He knew every word by heart. The white envelope with the bank's logo in the corner. The certified letter his father still didn't know about. Back taxes, $47,328. Due by Tuesday. Or the ranch his great-grandfather had built in 1912 would go to auction. He pushed the thought away and watched the truck get closer. The vehicle skidded around the last curve, kicking up rocks that pinged against its undercarriage. It wasn't slowing down for the main house. It was heading straight for him. Elias straightened in the saddle, his right hand moving instinctively to rest near the hammer of his rifle. The truck jerked to a stop 30 feet away, scattering the dozen or so cattle gathered near the fence line. The cows bellowed their displeasure and ambled off, tails swishing. The woman who climbed out of that truck made Elias's breath catch in his throat. She was maybe 35, with dark hair pulled back in a messy knot. Her dress was simple cotton, flowered pattern, but the shoulder was torn clean away from a seam. Dirt streaked her arms, and a thin scratch ran from a cheekbone down to her jaw. She stood there, one hand still on the open door, and looked at him. In Crooked Creek, Montana, population 873, everyone knew everyone. But Elias had never seen this woman up close. He'd only heard the stories. Juniper Murphy. Lived alone on the old Murphy place, 6 miles outside town. Her husband had died 5 years back, and since then, she'd become a kind of legend. People said she never came to town. Never spoke to anyone. The mail carrier left her packages at the end of her driveway because she wouldn't come to the door. Kids dared each other to ride their bikes past her property after dark. Crazy, some said. Dangerous, whispered others. But standing here now, in the afternoon heat, with her torn dress and her scratched cheek, she didn't look crazy. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. Like someone running on pure will. Elias swung down from his saddle, his boots hitting the hard-packed earth. Chester snorted but stood steady. "You're lost, Miss Murphy," Elias said. His voice came out quieter than he expected. He kept his hands visible, resting on his belt. She opened her mouth to speak. Her lips parted. But before a single word could leave her, the world cracked open. The rifle shot split the afternoon air like thunder with no storm behind it. Elias heard the bullet before he saw where it hit, a sharp zip, then a violent thwack as it punched into the cedar fence post not 6 inches from his hand. Wood splinters sprayed, stinging his knuckles, burying tiny shards in his skin. Chester reared. Elias grabbed the reins with one hand, his other already reaching for his rifle. Juniper Murphy didn't scream. She didn't duck. She stood frozen, staring toward the tree line a quarter-mile east, where a puff of gunsmoke drifted up through the cottonwoods. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. His mind raced through possibilities. Hunters. No hunter took a shot that close to a man and his stock. Kids with a rifle? Not on a Sunday. Not aiming to kill. Another shot kicked up dirt near the truck's rear tire, and Elias stopped thinking altogether. He lunged forward, grabbed Juniper by the arm, and pulled. She stumbled toward him, and he wrapped his arm around her waist, half carrying, half dragging her behind the cover of his horse. Chester was wild-eyed and trembling, but he was a good horse, a ranch horse, and he held his ground. Pressed against the horse's flank, Elias could feel Juniper's whole body shaking. Her ribs moved against his arm with each rapid breath. He looked down her face, inches from his own, and saw something that stopped the fear cold in his chest. Her fingernails. They were painted a soft, chipped blue. Like she'd done them herself, carefully, maybe a week ago. It was such a small thing. Such a human thing. And in that moment, she stopped being the woman everyone feared and became just a person. A person someone was trying very hard to kill. Elias made his choice. He reached up, pulled his Winchester from the saddle scabbard, and levered around into the chamber. The sound was loud and final. He stepped out from behind Chester just enough to fire 2 shots toward the tree line. Not to hit anything, just to say, "I see you. I'm armed. Back off." Then he grabbed Juniper's hand and pulled her toward the truck. "Get in. Stay down." She scrambled across the bench seat, and Elias threw himself behind the wheel. The truck's engine was still running. He jammed it into gear, hit the gas, and the wheels spun in the loose dirt before finding traction. They tore down the dirt road toward the ranch house, dust boiling up behind them like smoke. In the rearview mirror, Elias watched the tree line shrink. No more shots came. Juniper lay curled on the seat, her head below the window line, her breath coming in short gasps. She didn't speak. Didn't cry. Just breathed, in and out, like she was teaching herself how. Elias's hands gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles went white. The splinters in his right hand burned, but he didn't let go. He couldn't let go. Not yet. The house came into view, a white farmhouse with a wraparound porch, built by his great-grandfather, painted by his father every 3 years like clockwork. His father would be on that porch right now, sitting in his rocker, watching the sunset, waiting for Elias to come in for supper. Except today, when Elias skidded the truck to a halt in the yard, his father wasn't sitting. He was standing, frozen at the top of the porch steps. One hand gripped the rail so tight his knuckles showed white even from here. His face, already lined from 73 years of Montana sun, had gone the color of ash, of flour, of something dead. He wasn't looking at Elias. He was looking through the windshield, at the woman curled up on the seat, at Juniper Murphy. And in that look, Elias saw something he'd never seen in his father's eyes before. Fear. Real, deep, bone-cold fear. The kind that comes from somewhere old. Somewhere secret. Elias killed the engine. The sudden silence pressed down like weight. In the quiet, all he could hear was Juniper's breathing and the distant tick of the cooling engine and the first crickets starting their evening song. He looked at his father. He looked at the woman beside him. And he understood, with a certainty that sat heavy in his chest, that the bullet that nearly killed him was only the beginning. The real trouble was standing right there on the porch, wearing his father's face, carrying a secret so heavy it had turned a brave man to stone. Elias reached over and put his hand on Juniper's shoulder. She flinched, then stilled. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You're safe now." He didn't know if that was true, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever was coming, he wasn't going to face it from the outside looking in. He'd spent his whole life protecting this land. Maybe it was time to protect someone who actually needed him. The screen door creaked as his father finally moved, stepping back, holding it open. Waiting. Dreading. Hoping. Elias opened his door and stepped out into the cooling evening air. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Another day ending on the lazy S. But nothing about this day felt like any day before. He walked around the truck and opened Juniper's door, offered her his hand. After a long moment, she took it. Together, they walked toward the porch. Toward his father. Toward whatever truth was waiting in the fading light. And somewhere behind them, in the gathering dark, a single pair of headlights appeared on the distant road, moving slow. Waiting. Watching. The night had only just begun. The screen door banged shut behind them, and the sound echoed through the front room like a gunshot. Elias stood just inside the doorway, Juniper at his side, both of them covered in the fine grit of the dirt road. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the seconds, each one louder than it should have been. Elias's father hadn't moved from the spot where he'd been standing when they walked up the porch steps. Henry Callahan was 73 years old, a man who'd survived 3 decades of rodeo riding, 2 wars, and 1 heart attack that should have killed him. He'd buried a wife, raised a son alone, and never once in Elias's memory had he looked at anything with fear. Until now. Dad. Elias stepped forward, but his father's eyes stayed fixed on Juniper. Dad, talk to me. The old man's hands trembled against his cane. His knuckles were white where he gripped the worn wood. She shouldn't be here, he whispered. You gotta send her away. Juniper made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. She took a step backward, pressing against the closed door. Elias looked from his father to the woman and back again. The sun had nearly set now, and the room was filling with shadows. Through the front window, he could see the headlights still sitting on the distant road. Waiting. They shot at us, Dad. Someone took 2 shots at us out by the fence line. She came here for help, and I ain't sending her back out there. Henry closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something had shifted. The fear was still there, but underneath it, Elias saw something he recognized. Guilt. Heavy and old and worn smooth as river stone. Sit down, Henry said quietly. Both of you. Sit down and I'll tell you what I should have told you 20 years ago. The clock ticked. 8:37 p.m. Juniper sank into the faded floral armchair near the window, her hands gripping the armrests like she might need to run. Elias pulled a straight-back chair from the dining table and sat close to her, close enough that his knee almost touched hers. He didn't know why he did it. It just felt right. Henry lowered himself onto the worn leather couch, the one Elias's mother had picked out in 1985 and that had never been replaced because neither of them could bear to part with it. He set his cane aside and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Her husband, Henry began, then stopped. Started again. Billy Murphy. He wasn't no criminal. He was just a man who saw something he shouldn't have. Juniper's breath caught. She stared at Henry with an intensity that made Elias want to put himself between them, though he couldn't say why. 6 months back, Henry continued, Billy was working construction over in Red Lodge. One night he stayed late to finish a job, and he saw things. Men loading something into the back of a truck. Something wrapped in plastic. He was smart enough to hide, smart enough to get pictures with his phone. But he wasn't smart enough to keep his mouth shut. He told the sheriff, Juniper whispered. It was the first time Elias had heard her speak properly. Her voice was rough, like she hadn't used it in days. He thought he was doing the right thing. Henry nodded slowly. Sheriff Morrison's been in that developer's pocket for years. Thomas Wade pays him well to look the other way. So instead of investigating what Billy saw, the sheriff told Wade exactly who had seen it. The clock ticked. 8:41. 3 days later, Billy was dead. Truck went off the mountain road. They called it an accident. But Billy grew up on these roads. He could drive them blindfolded. Juniper's hands twisted in her lap. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she made no sound. No sobs, no gasps. Just silent tears falling onto her torn dress. Elias felt something hot building in his chest. And the pictures. Gone. Sheriff took Billy's phone as evidence and it got lost. Case closed. Henry's voice cracked. I knew, son. I knew what happened, and I did nothing. Elias stared at his father. You knew. You knew Billy Murphy was murdered and you didn't say anything. What was I supposed to say? I had no proof. Just a feeling. Just the way Sheriff Morrison started coming around asking questions about anyone who might have seen anything. He came here, Elias. Sat right where you're sitting and asked if we'd noticed anything strange around the Murphy place. He was fishing. Seeing if Billy had talked to anyone before he died. And you just let it go. Henry's eyes blazed with sudden fire. I let it go because I had a son to raise and a ranch to run and no way to fight a man like Wade. You think I'm proud of that? You think I haven't carried it every single day? The room fell silent except for the clock and the distant sound of an owl beginning its night hunt. Juniper wiped her face with the back of her hand. They've been after me for months, she said quietly. At first it was just watching. Cars parked at the end of my road. Hang-up phone calls. Then the letters started. Offers to buy my land. More money each time. When I wouldn't sell, things got worse. My tires slashed. My dog poisoned. I stopped going into town because everywhere I went, people stared, talked, called me crazy. Them, Elias said. They spread those rumors. Juniper nodded. Wade's men. They made sure everyone thought I was unstable, unreliable. So if something happened to me, nobody would be surprised. Nobody would ask questions. Henry leaned forward. Why tonight? What changed? Juniper's face went pale. I found something. In the barn. Billy hid it before he died. I found it last week, tucked behind a beam. A second phone. With copies of everything. I was going to take it to the county sheriff in Billings tomorrow. But they must have been watching. Must have seen me find it. The clock ticked. 8:47. A sound came from outside. An engine, idling closer. Not the road this time. The driveway. Elias stood. He moved to the window and peered through the gap in the curtains. A dark truck sat at the end of the lane, maybe 200 yards out. Its headlights were off, but he could see the faint glow of a cigarette inside. They know she's here, Henry whispered. Juniper stood. I'll go. I'll leave right now, and they'll follow me, and you'll be. Sit down. Elias's voice was quiet but absolute. She looked at him, startled. You're not going anywhere. Henry pushed himself up from the couch, using his cane for support. Son, we can't fight them. There's 3 of them at least. Probably more coming. I ain't asking you to fight. Elias moved to the gun cabinet in the corner. He pulled out his rifle, checked the load, then reached for the box of shells on the top shelf. I'm asking you to watch the back door. You can't take them all alone. Elias turned to face his father. In the dim light, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. I'm not alone. I got this house. I got this land. I got 70 years of Callahans who built this place with their bare hands and their stubborn pride. And I got a promise to keep. He looked at Juniper. No more running. No more hiding. They want you. They come through me. The clock ticked. 8:52. From outside, the sound of a truck door opening. Then another. Footsteps on gravel. Juniper stood frozen, her chipped blue fingernails pressed against her chest like a shield. Henry gripped his cane like a weapon. And Elias moved to the front door, one hand on the handle, the other holding his rifle at his side. Whatever happens, he said quietly, stay behind me. He opened the door. The night air rushed in, cool and sharp with the smell of pine and dust. 3 figures stood at the edge of the porch, backlit by the moon. The tallest one stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried the lazy confidence of a man who'd never been told no. Evening, Callahan. We are here for the woman. You got 30 seconds to hand her over, and we forget we ever saw you. Elias stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked beneath his boots. He raised his rifle, not pointing it at anyone, just holding it where they could see. She's under my roof now, he said. That makes her my business. The tall man laughed. It was not a nice sound. You don't know what you're getting into, cowboy. Behind Elias, in the darkness of the house, Juniper Murphy pressed her hand to her mouth and prayed to a god she wasn't sure was listening anymore. The clock ticked. 8:55. And Elias Callahan, who had spent his whole life protecting land and cattle and things that couldn't talk back, finally understood what it meant to protect something that could. The front door clicked shut, and the sound seemed to echo through the house like a stone dropped into still water. Elias stood with his back against the wood, his rifle still in his hands, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Through the door, he could hear them talking. Low voices, laughter. They weren't leaving. They were settling in. Juniper hadn't moved from her spot near the window. Her face was pale in the dim light, and her hands shook as she pressed them against her stomach. They'll wait all night, she whispered. They've done it before. Henry lowered himself onto the couch, his bad leg giving out beneath him. He looked older than Elias had ever seen him, the lines on his face carved deep by shadows. She's right. Wade's men got patience. They get paid whether they wait 5 minutes or 5 hours. The clock ticked. 9:03. Elias set his rifle on the dining table and walked to the window. Through the gap in the curtains, he could see the dark truck parked at the end of the lane. A cigarette glowed orange inside, then faded. They weren't hiding anymore. They wanted to be seen. "We could call the sheriff in Billings," Elias said, though he already knew the answer. Henry shook his head. "Nearest deputy is 45 minutes away. And that's if they come fast. These boys will be gone long before then. And tomorrow night, they'll be back. Or the next night. Or the next." Juniper sank into the armchair, her torn dress pooling around her. "I shouldn't have come here. I put you both in danger. I put your ranch in danger." Elias turned from the window. "You didn't put anything anywhere. They did this. Not you." But even as he said it, his eyes fell on the fireplace mantel, on the white envelope propped against an old photograph of his mother. The bank letter. $47,328. Due by Tuesday. Tuesday. Tomorrow was Monday. He walked to the mantel and picked up the envelope. It felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. Behind him, he heard his father shift on the couch. "What's that?" Elias closed his eyes. He'd meant to tell his father 100 times. He'd found a dozen different ways to start the conversation, and he'd choked on every single one. Now, with men waiting outside and a woman hiding in their living room, the truth felt like the least dangerous thing in the room. "Taxes," he said quietly. "Back taxes. 47,000. Due tomorrow." The silence that followed was worse than any words. Henry's voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "How long?" 2 years. I've been paying what I could, but the drought hit us hard, and then the cattle prices dropped, and I kept hoping something would change. I didn't want you to worry. Didn't want me to worry." Henry laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Son, I've been worrying about this ranch since before you were born. Worrying is what I do. You should have told me." Elias turned around. His father's face wasn't angry. It was something worse. Disappointed. The clock ticked. 9:11. Juniper looked from father to son, her brow furrowed. "This ranch. It's everything to you both, isn't it?" Elias nodded. "My great-granddad built this house in 1912. He planted those cottonwoods by the creek. My granddad dug the well by hand. My dad—" He looked at Henry. "My dad worked this land for 50 years without complaining once. This place isn't just dirt and fences. It's us. It's who we are. And if you lose it—" Henry answered before Elias could. "Then we got nothing. No home, no future, nothing to pass on. Just a name and a bunch of memories." The words hung in the air like smoke. Outside, another car pulled up. Elias moved to the window. A second truck now, parked behind the first. 4 men total, maybe 5. They stood outside their vehicles, talking, pointing at the house. One of them carried something long and dark. A rifle. Not hidden. Just held at his side like it belonged there. Juniper came to stand beside him. Close enough that he could smell the dust and sweat and something floral beneath it. Perfume, maybe. From before. "This is my fault," she said quietly. "All of it. It ain't your fault someone else decided to do wrong." "No." She shook her head. "I mean, yes, that too. But I mean, you're going to lose your ranch because of me. Even if those men leave tonight, even if I take that phone to Billings tomorrow and they arrest Wade and Morrison and everyone else, you still have a debt you can't pay. And that debt exists because you helped me." Elias looked at her. In the dim light, with her torn dress and her scratched cheek and her chipped blue fingernails, she looked so small. So human. So tired. "I made a choice," he said. "I'd make it again." "But your ranch." "My ranch is dirt and wood and nails. It ain't a person. It ain't a life." He turned back to the window. "I've been protecting this land my whole life. Maybe it's time I protected something that matters more." Behind them, Henry made a sound. Elias turned. His father was standing now, leaning on his cane, but standing. His eyes were wet, but his jaw was set. "You sound like your mother," Henry said. "She said something like that once. Right before she married a broke rodeo rider with nothing but a dying ranch and a whole lot of dreams." Elias felt something loosen in his chest. "Dad." "Don't dad me. I'm not done." Henry limped closer, his cane tapping against the hardwood. "I spent my whole life trying to hold on to this place because I thought that's what she would have wanted. I thought keeping the land meant keeping her memory alive. But that ain't true." He stopped in front of Elias. "She'd want me to keep people alive, not dirt." The clock ticked. 9:23. Juniper stepped forward. "Mr. Callahan, I can't let you lose your home for me. I'll leave. Tonight. I'll take the phone and I'll drive to Billings and they'll catch you before you hit the county line." Henry's voice was gentle but firm. "No. We do this together or we don't do it at all." Elias looked at his father. At this man who had taught him to ride, to rope, to fix fences and shoe horses and stand on his own 2 feet. This man who had carried guilt for 20 years and never said a word. This man who was choosing, right now, to be brave. "Dad," Elias said, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the taxes." Henry reached out and gripped his son's shoulder. His hand was bony, fragile, but his grip was still strong. "I'm sorry I raised a son who thought he had to carry everything alone. That one's on me." The clock ticked. 9:27. A knock came at the door. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just 3 slow raps, polite as church visitors. Elias moved to the door. Through the wood, a voice called out, "Mr. Callahan? I know you're in there. Let's talk. Man to man." Juniper grabbed his arm. "Don't." But Elias already knew what he had to do. He looked at his father, at Juniper, at the envelope on the mantel, at the rifle on the table. And then Elias realized the lie he'd told himself his whole life. He'd always believed that protecting the land was the same as protecting the people on it, that the ranch mattered more than anything because the ranch was what held them together. But he'd had it backward all along. The land didn't hold them together. They held the land together. His father, his mother's memory. And now, this woman with the chipped blue nails who had nowhere else to go. He'd been willing to die for dirt, but not for a stranger. Until now. Elias Callahan opened the door. The night air hit Elias like a wall. Cool and sharp, carrying the smell of pine and dust and the faint sweetness of hay from the barn. But underneath it all, something else. Cigarette smoke. Cheap cologne. The scent of men who didn't belong here. 3 figures stood at the bottom of the porch steps. The tall one in front wore a cowboy hat that looked too new, too clean. His boots shone in the moonlight like he'd never stepped foot in an actual barn. Behind him, 2 others waited. One held a rifle at his side, casual as a walking stick. "Evening," the tall man said. His voice was smooth, practiced. The kind of voice that belonged in boardrooms, not on dirt roads. "Name's Garrett. I work for Mr. Wade." Elias stepped onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind him. He didn't bring his rifle. That was a choice. He wanted them to see empty hands first. "You're on private land." Garrett smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "We know. And we apologize for the late visit. But Mr. Wade is eager to speak with the woman currently sitting in your living room. She has something that belongs to him." "She got a name." "She does. But that's not your concern." Elias leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed like he didn't have a care in the world. Like his heart wasn't pounding so hard he could feel it in his temples. "See, that's where you're wrong. She's in my house. That makes her my concern. Always did figure a man's home was his castle, but maybe you boys don't have homes." The man with the rifle shifted his weight. Garrett held up a hand, calm as still water. "We don't want trouble, Mr. Callahan. We just want what's ours. You give us the woman and the phone she's carrying, and we are gone. Simple as that." "And if I don't?" Garrett's smile faded. For the first time, something real flickered in his eyes. Something cold. Then things get complicated. You got a nice place here. Your family's been on this land a long time. Be ashamed to see something happen to it. The threat hung in the air between them, heavy as humidity before a storm. Behind Elias, the front door creaked open. He turned to see Juniper standing in the doorway, her face lit by the lamplight from inside. She'd fixed her hair somehow, pulled it back neat. Her chin was up. "I'll go," she said quietly. "It's okay." Elias shook his head. "Get back inside." "Elias." "I said get back inside." Something in his voice made her stop. She looked at him for a long moment, then stepped back and closed the door. Elias turned back to Garrett. "Here's how this is gonna go. You're gonna get in your trucks and drive off my land. And tomorrow morning, Miss Murphy and I are gonna drive to Billings and have a long conversation with the county sheriff about a dead man named Billy Murphy and the people who killed him." Garrett's face didn't change. But behind him, the man with the rifle raised it just slightly. "You're making a mistake," Garrett said. "No." Elias pushed off from the rail and stood to his full height. "I'm finally doing something right." The screen door banged open again. But this time it wasn't Juniper. Henry Callahan limped onto the porch, his old cane in one hand and Elias's rifle in the other. He walked right past his son, down the steps, until he stood face to face with Garrett. The old man was shaking, but his eyes were clear and steady as mountain water. "You know who I am?" Henry asked. Garrett looked him up and down. "I know you're too old to be playing hero." "I'm Henry Callahan. I've been on this land since 1948. I fought in Korea, buried a wife, raised a boy, and I've been scared of my own shadow for 20 years because I let men like you run roughshod over decent people." He lifted the rifle, not pointing it at anyone, just holding it where they could see. "That ends tonight." The man with the rifle started to raise it. Elias moved faster. He'd spent 42 years on this land. He knew every creaking board on that porch, every shadow, every patch of moonlight. He stepped sideways, grabbed the porch rail, and vaulted over it in one motion, landing hard on the packed earth. Before the rifleman could swing toward him, Elias had his hand around the barrel, pushing it toward the ground. They stood there, locked together, breathing hard. The other man, young, scared, just a hired hand, looked at Elias with wide eyes. "You don't want this," Elias said quietly. "This ain't your fight. You're getting paid what? $100 a day? 200. That worth dying for?" The young man's grip loosened. Just a fraction. But it was enough. Garrett laughed. "Let him go, Tommy. We are not doing this here." Elias released the barrel. Tommy stepped back, rifle lowered, relief written all over his face. Garrett looked at Elias, then at Henry, then at the house where Juniper stood silhouetted in the window. "You think you've won something tonight, but there's a dozen more where we came from. And tomorrow, when that sun comes up, you're still broke and she's still hiding and nothing's changed." He turned and walked toward the trucks. His men followed. At the edge of the yard, Garrett stopped, looked back. "One piece of advice, old-timer. Check your barn in the morning. Fires start easy this time of year." Then he was gone, swallowed by the dark. Elias stood frozen, those last words echoing in his head. Beside him, Henry swayed, and Elias grabbed his arm to steady him. "You okay?" Henry nodded, but his face was gray. "That boy's gonna burn us out." The clock in the house struck 10. Elias helped his father inside, sat him on the couch, and turned to Juniper. She stood by the window, watching the taillights disappear down the road. "They'll be back," she whispered. "I know." "What do we do?" Elias looked at the mantel, at the white envelope, at the photograph of his mother, smiling like she knew something he didn't. "Dad," he said, "that money in the savings account. The emergency fund. How much?" Henry frowned. 12,000. "Why?" "Because we are gonna need every dollar we got. Juniper, that phone of yours. The evidence. It's enough to put Wade away for good." She nodded. "It's enough." Billy was smart. He got everything. Names, dates, photos of the body they buried. It's all there. Then here's what we do. Elias pulled a chair to the table and sat down. Henry and Juniper joined him, their faces lit by the single lamp. We can't stay here tonight. Too exposed. Too easy to corner. We take the truck, we drive to Billings now, and we don't stop until we are standing in the sheriff's office. But your ranch, Juniper started, will still be here tomorrow. And if those boys come back and find nobody home, maybe they move on. Maybe they don't. But either way, we are alive to deal with it. Henry reached out and gripped Elias's arm. Son, if we leave now, we are running. No, Dad. We are not running. We are choosing our ground. Elias looked at Juniper. You said you've been running for months. How's that worked out? She shook her head. Not good. Then let's try something different. The clock ticked. 10:14. Elias stood. Pack what you need. We leave in 10 minutes. Juniper disappeared into the kitchen to get water for the drive. Henry limped to his bedroom to grab his medications. And Elias stood alone in the living room, looking at everything his family had built. The worn couch. The faded curtains. The photograph of his mother on their wedding day. The rifle his father had carried down the porch steps. The envelope on the mantel. He walked to the fireplace and picked up the envelope. $47,000. The number had haunted him for months. Kept him awake at night. Made him feel like a failure. Now, holding it, he felt something else. Freedom. Because he'd finally figured out that money was just money. Land was just land. But people? People were everything. He tucked the envelope into his vest pocket. Not as a burden this time. As a reminder. A promise that he'd figure it out. Somehow. The front door opened. Juniper stood there, a small bag in her hand, her face washed clean of tears. I'm ready, she said. Elias nodded. Let's go. They walked out together into the cool June night. Henry waited by the truck, already in the passenger seat. Elias helped Juniper into the back, then climbed behind the wheel. The engine turned over, loud in the silence. Headlights cut through the dark, illuminating the dirt road ahead. As they pulled away from the house, Elias looked in the rearview mirror. The white farmhouse sat quiet under the stars, exactly as it had for over 100 years. Cottonwoods swayed in the breeze. The barn stood solid and square. He didn't know if he'd ever see it again. But for the first time in his life, that wasn't the scariest thing he could imagine. The scariest thing was letting fear make his choices for him. The truck bumped down the dirt road, past the fence line where this all started, past the post with the bullet scar still fresh in the wood. Elias pressed the gas and pointed them toward Billings. Behind them, the ranch grew small in the darkness. Ahead, the highway stretched out like a ribbon of possibility. Juniper leaned forward from the back seat. Elias. Yeah. Thank you. For not letting me run. He caught her eyes in the mirror. In the dim light, they looked almost blue. Almost hopeful. Nobody runs forever, he said. Sometimes you gotta turn around and fight. Henry snorted from the passenger seat. Listen to you. Gettin' all philosophical at midnight. Elias laughed. It felt strange and good. Blame you. You raised me. Fair enough. Henry settled back in his seat. Now drive, boy. We got a sheriff to wake up. The truck rolled on through the night, carrying 3 people who'd started the day as strangers and were ending it as something else. Something that looked a lot like family. And somewhere behind them, in the darkness of the Lazy S Ranch, the cottonwoods whispered in the wind and waited for morning. The first light of dawn crept over the Pryor Mountains, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. Elias had been driving for 6 hours, stopping only once for gas and coffee at an all-night station in Hardin. His eyes burned with exhaustion, but he couldn't have slept if he tried. Beside him, Henry dozed fitfully, his head against the window. In the back seat, Juniper sat wide awake, watching the sunrise with an expression Elias couldn't quite read. The Billings County Sheriff's Office came into view just before 7 in the morning. A low brick building with flags snapping in the breeze and patrol cars lined up out front like sleeping horses. Elias pulled into the parking lot and killed the engine. The silence rushed in. "This is it," he said quietly. Juniper reached into her bag and pulled out the phone. Billy's phone. The one she'd found hidden in the barn. It felt impossibly small for something that carried so much weight. "You ready?" Elias asked. She looked at him in the rearview mirror. "I've been ready for 6 months. I just didn't know it." They walked into the building together, the three of them. Henry leaning on his cane, Juniper clutching the phone like a lifeline, Elias with the white envelope still in his vest pocket. The deputy at the front desk was young, maybe 25, with a fresh haircut and a name tag that said Martinez. He looked up with the practiced boredom of someone who'd spent too many hours watching empty lobbies. "Can I help you folks?" Juniper stepped forward. "I need to speak with the sheriff. About a murder." The boredom vanished from Deputy Martinez's face. He sat up straighter. "What murder?" "William Murphy. Red Lodge. 6 months ago. They called it an accident. It wasn't." Martinez looked at the three of them, the tired old man, the woman with the torn dress, the cowboy with dust on his boots. Something in his eyes shifted. He'd seen enough to know when someone was telling the truth. "Wait here." He disappeared through a door behind the desk. The clock on the wall ticked away the seconds. 7:03. 7:04. 7:05. A door opened and a tall woman in a tan uniform walked out. Silver hair pulled back tight, eyes the color of winter sky. The badge on her chest said Sheriff Morrison. But Elias knew right away this was a different Morrison. No relation to the crooked sheriff back home. Just a name that happened to match. "I'm Sheriff Barnes," she said. "Here, you got something to tell me." An hour later, they sat in her office with mugs of coffee that had gone cold and forgotten. Juniper had told the whole story. Billy finding the body. The photos he'd taken. The threats. The truck that ran him off the road. The months of hiding. The men who'd shown up at the Lazy S Ranch. Sheriff Barnes listened without interrupting. When Juniper finally fell silent, she reached for the phone and began scrolling through the photos. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Barnes set the phone down and looked at Juniper with something like respect. "This is good work. Your husband was a brave man." Juniper's chin trembled, but she held it steady. He was just trying to do the right thing. "Well, we are going to finish what he started." Barnes stood and moved to the door. "Martinez, get the task force on the phone. And put out a bolo on Thomas Wade and Sheriff Morrison. I want them picked up for questioning before lunch." The next hours passed in a blur. Statements were taken. Phone records copied. Maps drawn. Somewhere around noon, someone brought sandwiches, and Elias realized he hadn't eaten since yesterday. By late afternoon, word came back. Thomas Wade had been arrested trying to cross into Wyoming. Sheriff Morrison was picked up at his own house, still in his bathrobe. Both were being transported to Billings for arraignment. Juniper sat in a plastic chair in the hallway when she heard the news. She didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for half a year. Elias sat down beside her. The hallway was quiet, just the hum of fluorescent lights and distant phones ringing. "It's over," he said. She opened her eyes. "It's just starting. Trials. Testifying. Probably appeals." But she was smiling. Just a little. "But Billy gets to rest now. That's what matters." Henry limped over and lowered himself into the chair on Juniper's other side. "What about you? What happens now for you?" Juniper looked at her hands, at the chipped blue polish on her nails. "I go home, I guess. Back to the Murphy place. Figure out how to live there without being afraid." "That place got a barn needs mending?" Elias asked. She looked at him, confused. "Probably. Why?" "Just thinking I owe you some fence work. After all this." Henry snorted. "Boy, you owe her more than fence work. You owe her dinner first. Manners, Elias." Juniper laughed. It was the first time Elias had heard her really laugh, and it sounded like water over rocks, clear and bright and real. "I'd like that," she said. "Dinner. Sometime." Elias felt something warm spread through his chest. Sometime soon. The sun was setting when they finally left the sheriff's office. Orange and gold spilled across the parking lot, turning everything warm and soft. Elias helped his father into the truck, then turned to Juniper. "You need a ride home." She shook her head. "Sheriff Barnes is sending a deputy to take me. They want me to look at some things on the property. Evidence." She paused. "But I'll see you soon." "Count on it." She stood on tiptoes and kissed his cheek, quick and light, like a butterfly landing. Then she walked away toward a waiting patrol car. Elias stood there a moment, touching his cheek where she'd kissed him. Then he climbed into the truck and started the engine. The drive back to the Lazy S took 3 hours. Henry slept most of the way. Elias's mind drifted through everything that had happened. 48 hours. That's all it had been. 2 days that changed everything. They pulled onto the dirt road just before 10 at night. The moon was bright enough to see by, casting silver light across the fields. And there, ahead, was the house. Still standing. Still solid. The cottonwoods swaying in the breeze. The barn square and true. Elias parked and helped his father inside. Henry was exhausted, barely able to make it to his bedroom. Elias got him settled, then walked back outside. The night air was cool and clean. Crickets sang their endless song. An owl called from somewhere down by the creek. Elias walked to the fence line, to the post where this all started. In the moonlight, he could see the bullet scar, a raw gash in the wood, pale against the weathered grey. He touched it with his fingers, felt the splinters, rough and real. A scar on the land, like the one on his forearm from the scuffle in the yard. Like the ones Juniper carried in her heart. Like the ones this town would carry for years, learning that the woman they'd feared was really the one who needed the most. He thought about the envelope in his vest. $47,000. Still due. Still impossible. But somehow, it didn't feel as heavy anymore. The screen door creaked behind him. He turned to see his father standing on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. "Couldn't sleep," Henry said. "Me neither." Henry limped down the steps and joined Elias by the fence. They stood together, father and son, looking at the land that had been in their family for over 100 years. "We are gonna lose it," Henry said quietly. "Not a question. Just a fact. Maybe." Elias pulled out the envelope. "But maybe not. I got her idea." "Tell me." "I've been thinking. That back pasture, the one that's too rocky for cattle. What if we leased it to them solar companies? The ones always sending letters. They'd pay good money. Maybe enough to cover the taxes." Henry was quiet for a long moment. Solar panels. On Callahan land. Better than losing it altogether. Henry nodded slowly. "Your mother would have liked that. She always did believe in new ideas." He looked at his son. "When did you get so smart?" "Had a good teacher." They stood in silence, watching the moon climb higher. After a while, Henry went back inside. But Elias stayed. He thought about Juniper, alone in that big house 6 miles away. He thought about Billy Murphy, buried in the cemetery in Red Lodge, finally at peace. He thought about the men in jail, the trials to come, the long road ahead. And he thought about promises. The kind you make with your whole heart, not knowing if you can keep them. The kind that change you just by trying. The leather of his glove creaked as he gripped the fence post. The dust was still. The night was quiet. And somewhere in the darkness, headlights appeared on the road. Not trucks full of menace this time. Just a single car, moving slow. It turned into his driveway. Elias waited as it approached. As it stopped. As the door opened and Juniper Murphy stepped out, wrapped in a borrowed coat, her face lifted to the moonlight. "Couldn't sleep either," she called softly. Elias smiled. "Me neither." She walked toward him, across the yard, past the house, to the fence line where he stood. When she reached him, she didn't say anything. Just stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Together, they looked out at the land, at the cottonwoods, at the bullet-scarred post, at the future, wide and uncertain and full of possibility. "We are gonna make it," Elias said. "Somehow." Juniper reached out and took his hand. Her fingers laced through his, warm and real. "I know," she said. And standing there in the Montana night, with the moon overhead and the crickets singing and the weight of everything slowly lifting, Elias Callahan understood something he'd spent 42 years missing. A promise to protect wasn't about being strong enough. It was about showing up. Again and again. Even when you were scared. Even when it seemed impossible. Even when the whole world told you to walk away. He showed up. And that made all the difference. The night wrapped around them like a blanket, soft and deep and full of stars. Somewhere in the house, the grandfather clock ticked away the seconds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, new choices. But tonight? Tonight was enough.